All right.
Beautiful. Perfect. So thank you so much, Brian, for that introduction. And hello, everyone. My name is Maya, and alongside Meg, Abby, and Scott, we will briefly discuss the SAPHE grant, or the State Action for Public Health Excellence grant, which includes air quality monitoring and mitigation in the North Suffolk communities of Revere, Winthrop, and Chelsea. So a little bit about us. We are part of the Air Partners Air Quality Team at Olin College of Engineering. So our team's focus is really around piloting strategies for improving air health in the communities around Boston Logan. Today's presentation is really a compilation of the work that's been done by our team up to this point in the grant. And we're here kind of to share what we've learned and solicit feedback as we move into the next stages of drafting this plan. With that in mind, something that would be really welcome is feedback. So we've created a feedback form for everyone. If you could fill it out as the presentation's going on, after the presentation, any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, we want to hear all of it. We're really looking for your feedback and your input, and we'd love to build this with you. So anything you say to us is super valuable, and thank you in advance. So as a brief overview of what's to come, we'll first dive into some community context. Then we'll look at major pollutant sources and our team's analysis of those pollutants alongside our related work. And finally, we'll provide some recommendations around action in this area. First, we'll look a little bit at each community and the scientific context behind this work more broadly. So, as I mentioned earlier, this presentation and the written strategic plan focus on the North Suffolk communities of Revere, Chelsea, and Winthrop. The Air Partners group has already done substantial pilot work on air monitoring and mitigation with community partners in East Boston, and in many ways, the pilot work and recommendations in here represent an extension of the model we've developed there, and they're informed by the lessons that we've learned in Eastie. So, we employ a number of community-driven strategies to all of our work in Air Partners, which really means understanding and listening to the community before starting any work. Through stakeholder interviews, we learned that in Revere, the Wheelabrator incinerator is a major community concern, and that CARES Act money was allocated toward nearly 300 HEPA purifiers. In Winthrop, we learned that the WIN 2030 plan found air quality to be an area of high importance, so much so that there are new city hires to focus on these issues. And in Chelsea, we learned that there's a major state highway that bisects the municipality, and there are many other industrial and transportation-based pollutant sources, and that research groups from local schools are looking at air quality. We also asked many questions about the ways in which a strategic air monitoring and mitigation plan would best serve each community. We heard that Revere needs information on what's happening now and what things could be, and to use this plan with environmental and community groups. We learned that Winthrop needs concrete, detailed steps toward action and a shorter plan timeline that can begin to be used right now. Lastly, we learned that Chelsea needs information on cost, feasibility, and location of any proposed steps, and specifics on regions that should be targeted.
So to get a little bit into the scientific context around the air quality problem, we know there's a bunch of different types of pollutant sources in addition to the airport, and that those sources generate a variety of different types of pollutants, including gaseous pollutants, which is CO2, nitrous oxide, or these particle matter pollutants that are scaled by size. And within the world of these particle matter pollutants, the size of the particle is related quite a bit to the severity of the impact. And our team has come to focus more and more on these PM particles because they are more and more linked with the health impacts. And so as particle matter is increasingly identified as the most dangerous component of air pollutant, we're acknowledging that there's a scale of sizes that are included under that, and it's important to understand what those PM classifications mean because they impact how they're regulated. So there's the three major types of pollutant size up on the screen. And for a little bit, for reference, human hair is around 60,000 nanometers. So PM10 is about 6 times smaller than that. So we're talking really itty bitty. We're particularly concerned about a class of particles called UFPs, which is all the way on the right. They're functionally unregulated right now by the EPA, and a lot of them are produced during airport operations. Because of their size, they're small enough to cross the blood-brain barrier, which can lead to some very negative health effects. And also, due to their size, 70% of UFPs that are in the outdoor environment eventually make it indoors. And specific to the area on Boston Logan, we know that there are health impacts happening right now. The Logan Airport Health Study, which was finally published in 2014, found that within 5 miles of the airport, children are 4 times as likely to have asthma and adults are twice as likely to have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. But we know the study wasn't comprehensive. It only focused on respiratory and cardiovascular conditions. There wasn't an in-depth look at medical records or specific analysis about the exposure of the individuals in the study. So we know that there's a lot more health effects likely out there. In the literature about air pollution, there are many other health impacts, including neurological disorders, cancer, and cognitive impairment. And of course, during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's really underscored the importance of living in a healthy community to avoid some of the worst health outcomes from respiratory conditions. So with that context, we want to walk through the work we've done to identify specific pollutant sources. And we want to first offer a lens through which you should view some of the information we're going to show you next. So we started by developing an interactive visual tool to summarize some of our key sources in the North Suffolk community and to evaluate what the impact of those pollutant sites have. We need to look at the downwind impact. So when pollutants are emitted by a source, the impact of those pollutants is most acutely experienced by people in the downwind direction. So the windrose plots, which you see on the screen, are based on Boston meteorology data for the past 5 years and show the frequency of wind direction by season. So keep in mind that the wind direction is defined as the direction in which the wind is coming from. So with the exception of spring, the dominant wind direction throughout the year are from the west, southwest, and northwest, which means that areas to the east of the pollutant site experience the most impact. So as we look at the sources in the next segment, keep in mind that the worst effects of those sites are experienced to the east of their physical location. So next, we're going to do a little walkthrough of the visual tool and explain why and how we identified the sources that we have. So of course, here's the communities of Chelsea, Revere, and Winthrop. And we know that Boston Logan is one of the most obvious pollutant sources in the area. So the larger polygon you see is the 200-foot airspace for the airport. And that's important because at a height of 200 foot, the pollutant plume from the airplane is hitting the ground. And so those are areas that are definitely feeling the impact. Next, we took a look at some major roadways. So the Massachusetts Department of Transportation keeps statistics from some sensors in the area that summarize the information in terms of average annual daily traffic, or basically how many cars a day are on the road. Unsurprisingly, the most heavily trafficked road that we saw in the communities was Route 1, seeing about 81,000 vehicles a day. For reference, I-90 headed into Boston sees about 90,000 vehicles a day. So those roads are really very close to one another in terms of traffic. We saw on Route 1A and Revere Parkway are between 45 and 55,000 vehicles a day. And then we looked for any other roads that were seeing more than 20,000 vehicles a day, which highlighted Broadway Street in Chelsea. You might notice in this portion of the map, it looks a little bit like Winthrop is missing. The Department of Transportation doesn't maintain or have any sensors in Winthrop, so the understanding of the traffic impact in that community is a bit more of a black box right now. So next, we took a look at EPA identified sources of pollutants. So these are largely petroleum and natural gas management as well as waste management. And they're helpful for getting an idea of some of the industrial pollutants, but they aren't comprehensive. EPA point sources have to be completely stationary. They have to be above a certain polluting level. So it doesn't really help understand things like maritime operations or places where traffic is playing a big role, which is why we have this section that we sort of termed community identified sources, which are locations we heard from when we were talking to city officials about where there is concern. So areas around the commuter rail, maritime traffic along Chelsea Creek, as well as some other distribution areas.
So we're now going to give an overview of the pilot work we're conducting in North Suffolk communities. So we're currently running 2 air quality pilots, one to measure the ambient or outdoor air in North Suffolk communities, and another to measure the impact of HEPA purifiers in municipal spaces and classrooms. For both pilots, we've completed data cleaning and preliminary analysis, and we will share a small preview of our results today. So this chart shows several pollutant sources and their relative sizes. As we give a brief glimpse into some of the field results, it's important to keep in mind that smaller particles, particularly UFPs, are likely coming from combustion sources and are the most dangerous. The smallest particles are also the most expensive to measure. That being said, we know that the presence of UFPs can be correlated with the presence of gaseous pollutants that we've mentioned earlier. Our pilot studies are measuring particles across the spectrum. So we directly measure UFPs in our HEPA pilots and utilize gaseous pollutant indicators in our ambient pilot. And we use the modular and mod PM sensors to measure larger particles in both our ambient and HEPA pilots.
Great. So we'll start by giving you a little bit of a sense of the ambient pilot work that we've done. So as part of this work, we have placed 9 different sensors in the North Suffolk communities. So there are 6 across Revere, 2 in Winthrop, and 1 in Chelsea. And these are distributed between the modular sensors that measure both gases and particle phase pollutants, and the modular PM, which measures particulate matter only. So in the next slide, we're just going to pick off one of these sites, and this is where, Elle, you're free to get excited. So this is a site in Gibson Park, which is right across the marsh from the Wheelabrator incinerator. I want to give you a sense of a couple of the different visualizations that we can use to derive some insights from the data. So this sensor has been out in the field since January 22nd. So we've got a few months worth of data. And what's shown here on the right is the normalized pollutant concentration versus hour of the day. So normalized means that you take the average over a whole day, you divide all the average hourly concentrations by that average, and you get to see an enhancement or a suppression in pollutant over the course of the day. So a couple of things that you'll notice. First is that all of these pollutants are enhanced in the morning, starting around 5 to 6 a.m., which corresponds to your morning rush hour. This site is right next to Route 1A, so that's not too surprising. You see another enhancement in the evening, correlated with an evening rush hour. The other thing that you'll notice is that brown trace, which is nitrogen oxide or NO, is significantly enhanced above all of the other pollutants early in the morning. So that tells us that something interesting is going on with NO compared with the rest of the pollutants that's worth looking a little bit closer at. You can look at these diurnal profiles also by day of week, and you can identify some day-to-day variability and identify things like weekend versus weekday effects. And also here you see with NO that NO peak early in the morning happens on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, but not so much on Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. So there's something curious for us to explore a little bit more. In the next slide, you'll see where this data can come to life a little bit more as more of a diagnostic tool. So this plot shows carbon monoxide concentration that's been merged with meteorology data and is superimposed on a compass. And what this does is it explicitly links wind speed and wind direction with pollutant concentrations. So you can really start to see where different pollutants are originating from, what their source is. Carbon monoxide is a pollutant that's a criteria pollutant that can bind hemoglobin in your blood and make you lightheaded and even cause death at high enough concentrations. I highlighted the National Air Quality 1 hour standard for CO with the arrow, which is down there in the green. You can see that anytime the wind is coming from the direction of Route 1A, the concentration of carbon monoxide is really high at this particular site. So you can start to understand some of the impacts of different sources in a site. In the next slide, you'll see PM 2.5, which is some of the smaller particles measured by the modular PM and the modular instrument. And this is superimposed on a satellite map, and you can start to see, well, yeah, there's definitely some source coming from the direction of Route 1A. You see some higher concentrations, the warmer colors to the east, but there's also a significantly higher concentration lobe that's contributed from the direction of the Wheelabrator incinerator and also its associated landfill. That makes sense because PM 2.5 does get some dust contribution, but it's largely industrial contribution, combustion, as well as heavy machinery like dump trucks and bulldozers that are often operating down there at the landfill. So you can start to see some of those source impacts. And then in the next slide, you'll see nitrogen oxide. Nitrogen oxide has similar sources to PM 2.5, but it's more specifically associated with vehicle emissions and industrial combustion. And again, you see the same story of Route 1A contributes those concentrations, but then there's a really clear higher concentration lobe that comes directly from the direction of the Wheelabrator incinerator. So just to kind of summarize all of that, some of the insights that we're seeing in the next slide is that we can determine from these preliminary sensors, and this is just a glimpse from one of those particular sites, we can see where sources are in both time and space through these gas and particle phase measurements. And this bears truth in all the sensors that we have out in the field right now. Some of those sources like primary combustion and airport plumes like Megan was talking about, those are really small particles, and we see the gas phase signatures of those really small particles, but we don't necessarily see them in the bigger particles. So sometimes we can only see those plumes with gases. And as a result of the work we've been doing to clean and analyze these data, we have some automatic cleaning and report generation that's currently being developed to get from raw data to these insights a little bit faster.
Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the HEPA purifier pilot work. So for the HEPA pilot studies, we've installed purifiers in rooms in both municipal buildings and schools. And we've used both CPC sensors, which measure UFPs, ultrafine particles, and MOD PM sensors, which measure size resolved particulate matter, to measure the impacts of HEPA purifiers in reducing UFP and PM exposure. So this time plot shows the effects of the HEPA purifier in one room from our pilot study. So I just want to give your attention to the y-axis, which represents the ratio between the indoor and outdoor air concentrations. And we really focus on this ratio in our analysis to evaluate the effects of the HEPA purifiers independently from the fluctuating outdoor air concentration. So on the next slide, you'll see another way to summarize this data, which is a box plot. So this box plot summarizes the change in particle concentration for both the CPC and MOD PM data of one room. Just to clarify what this box plot is representing. So each box is showing the middle 50% of data, while the whiskers or the lines around them show the upper and lower 25% of data. And the horizontal line in the middle of the box represents the median of that data. And the first column is the CPC data, and all the other categories, the remaining 5, are PM measurements from the MOD PM sensors. And on the next slide, you'll see this bar chart, which actually compares and categorizes some of the different pilot rooms based on the conditions we ran the experiments in. And here we're comparing a percent concentration decrease from before and after the HEPA purifier installation. And we decided to categorize these rooms because some rooms, before we launched our experiment, they actually had low quality purifiers installed in the room. Others had maybe a window was cracked open all the time, or they had a door that was propped open to a hallway that led right outside. And so we wanted to make sure we capture those different circumstances when looking at the data. But if you go to the next slide, our initial analysis found a 55% reduction in UFP exposure with the installation and usage of HEPA purifiers in these spaces, which is really exciting and really promising. So our next steps include continuing analysis on 12 other rooms in our pilot and to communicate the results in our strategic plan. But I just want to give some of the insights we have gathered so far. So firstly, it is very evident that the HEPA purifiers reduce UFP exposure in indoor spaces based off of the data from our CPC sensors. Our PM data analysis is still underway, but our initial investigation also seems to confirm these results. And then finally, it is crucial to have consistent and proper usage of these HEPA purifiers. Really, the consistent compliance is what we need to actually get the full effects of the HEPA purifiers. They can be sitting in the room, but if they're not on and used constantly, we won't get that impact.
Definitely. So we synthesized all of the information that you've heard so far into some actionable recommendations for the North Suffolk communities. We first wanted to prioritize vulnerable populations. So in this case, those in environmental justice communities and those in schools, since children feel increased effects of air pollution. We also felt it was important to prioritize regions close to pollutant sources. The synthesis of those two maps gave us this map that you see on the slide. So the areas outlined in the blue boxes on this image are the areas that should be prioritized for air quality monitoring and mitigation efforts. On the high level, we'd really like to recommend a 3-phase plan. Phase 1 will include ambient monitoring and mitigation prioritization. Phase 2 will cover site identification, HEPA mitigation, and compliance. And finally, the 3rd phase will include monitoring, evaluation, and compliance.
So phase 1 consists of launching a sensor network in these communities that measures size resolved particle number concentration, as well as several gaseous pollutants at a subset of those sites. So we propose that data is recorded at a 1-minute temporal resolution, and that sensors are placed at a 250 meter by 250 meter spatial resolution near sources. So literature indicates that pollution concentrations decay to background levels at around 300 meters from the source. So we need to ensure sensor placement is dense enough to identify relevant sources. Air quality data collected through these sensors would be publicly available to these communities in real time through the deployment of a free application. So this is a cost breakdown for installing and maintaining the proposed sensor network. So the sensor equipment that measures gaseous pollutants is more expensive, but they're really important for telling the UFP presence story. Other fees include data management, sensor maintenance, and an app to ensure that members of the community have access to this data in real time.
And so to speak to the cost of a HEPA purifier intervention, we're taking a look at the 5-year and 10-year cost. The price of the purifier itself and those filter replacements depends a little bit on whether they're bought in bulk or individuals are purchasing them, which is whether there's a range of prices up there. And so the cost for these purifiers are for a high quality HEPA purifier, which has a high flow rate and exit velocity, high filter medium surface area. It requires a low filter replacement frequency and also has a very simple user interface. The price you see includes the filter replacement, the HEPA purifier, as well as an electricity subsidy for the additional cost of running that purifier. But it does not include the shipping fee for the materials or an awareness and compliance follow-up program, which we do know is important to making sure purifiers are used properly for maximum benefit. So if we were to consider what the intervention would look like for a home, the average home would need 3 to 4 purifiers. So on the high end, for a 10-year cost, we're talking about $7,000 for those purifiers, those replacements, and those electricity subsidies. So those purifiers are deployed as part of phase 2. After we're able to continue to identify high priority areas from the air quality monitoring network established in phase 1. And phase 2 also begins the rollout of a compliance program to help people understand why they should be using their purifier. And then finally, in phase 3, we're finishing the rollout of purifiers and maintaining the monitoring and compliance, which will be needed to be ongoing to continue to have a good understanding of the air quality situation in the communities.
Great. So we summarized all that in a bit of a table, and by each phase outline some of the goals and the activities associated with achieving those goals in each phase. So phase 1 really is about establishing community-owned air monitoring networks that we can use to identify or in some cases confirm the primary pollutant sources that we already suspect. And then based on that information to identify or again, confirm in some cases, the priority areas for mitigation. So we want that to be data-driven, the places that we're prioritizing for mitigation. In phase 2, that's really about getting HEPA mitigation going. So again, leveraging that data from the ambient air monitoring to identify specific sites that will get HEPA air purifier mitigation, both residences, municipal buildings, and classrooms. There's a lot of community engagement necessary to increase awareness around air pollution and the potential benefits of HEPA air purifiers, and then to actually install those in residences and begin some of the monitoring and evaluation work that's going to demonstrate that you're actually achieving exposure reduction. So some of these paired indoor-outdoor sensor placements and a subset of the sites where you're doing the intervention to ensure that you're getting exposure reduction. And then as Megan also indicated, that compliance is really important. It can be inconsistent, and studies that have failed to show an impact on health from HEPA air purifiers has primarily been because people haven't used them as anticipated. So that's a key part of any of this work for mitigation. Finally, stage 3 is as Abby said, it's mostly wrapping up that HEPA installation, continued monitoring and evaluation, and continuing with the compliance awareness and community engagement.
Yeah, so to wrap up, we'd like to highlight our next steps for this plan. So we plan to continue our ambient and HEPA pilot analysis and deliver those results in our strategic plan. We also intend to continue to receive feedback, preview to asking for your feedback at the end of this meeting. And we also, once we were going to plan to incorporate that as we draft the strategic plan in the months of May and June. And then our hope is that this plan will then make it into the hands of officials in North Suffolk communities to spark action towards a healthier future. So with that, I want to thank you all for taking the time to engage with our presentation. Here's the QR code, and Maya just put the link for our feedback form, which you can use to give us feedback. But we are also open to taking any questions now.
All right, so we'll stop the screen share. Yeah, hop in and
thank you for all of the work that you've done. The presentation was excellent, and it's not great news, so I can't really say I'm excited, but I mean, I am excited to finally have the data after so long of working on these potential issues and health hazards in our community. So thank you for all the work you've done. I'm looking forward to having the link to the video, and perhaps, I'm not sure if you'd be interested in presenting to a few environmental groups. Perhaps we could pull everyone together for sort of one Zoom session, so that we'd have the opportunity for a question and answer as well. But well done, and thank you.
I think so.
Barbara, did I see you have a question?
Well, it's not so much a question as it is another thank you for all this hard work. And finally, we have data from the Gibson Park site. I'm not sure we've ever had that before. I would guess we've never had that kind of analysis.
We have,
and that's great. If you want to do some sort of public access cable video, whatever, I can help do that.
Right on. Yeah, I think it's worth highlighting again that that's only 3 months worth of data, and the more you're collecting these data, the clearer the picture becomes about where the sources are and what their relative contribution is. And you can see things about like day of week and seasonal impacts and meteorological variability. So this is also, we only have 9 sites out there, and that was a snapshot of data from a single site. So if you're able to increase the density of these sensors around some of these sites, you can really paint a super clear picture about the impact of some of those sources.
I was wondering if you could speak to knowing that I've heard conversations about the desire to increase monitoring, but a lot of times the conversation drifts towards those lower cost, open source air quality monitors like Purple Air, and wondering if you could speak to the differences in the data that you would get from sort of the high quality calibrated measurement tools that you're using versus those sort of lower cost open source.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a thing that we talk a lot about. So Purple Air is basically, it's a PVC pipe with a $20 sensor attached to it that does a pretty good job at seeing some of the smaller particles, but it can't see anything bigger than about a micron. And so some of those impacts of like the Wheelabrator landfill in that area, Purple Air is not going to be able to resolve that kind of thing. In addition, the Purple Air won't be able to see some of the things that we can only see in the gas phase signature. Like again, with that Wheelabrator example, the clearest indication of the impact of the incinerator at that site was actually the nitrogen oxide data, which Purple Air doesn't have. And so we recommend for the North Suffolk communities a combination of sensors that are higher quality particulate matter sensors paired with some of the gas and particle phase sensors to be able to get a clearer picture of what the impact is around the areas. The modular PM that only measures PM that we use, one of the benefits of that is it pairs 2 different measurements inside that sensor to be able to see not just the really small ones, but also particles up to about 20 microns in diameter. So you start to see some of those dust contributions. And it also plugs into this sort of ecosystem of real-time available data that can then be displayed in an app that can be accessed in real time by anyone in the community. And all of this auto report generation and auto cleaning work that we're doing also feeds into that ecosystem. So there's a bit of like, what environment do you want to work in? But I think at a more fundamental scientific measurement level, you're just going to miss a lot if you are only going with those really low cost sensors. So yeah, I think if you're going to make an investment of people hours and scoping out the sites and getting things installed, better to do it with a higher quality sensor. And you don't have to do it with like $20,000 measurements, but you can do it with $1,000 to $6,000 measurements.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
One thing I think is really important, and if you could speak to it a little bit more about what you're planning on in terms of the, because I did download, for the stuff that we've been doing, I downloaded the beta app of being able to access it on the phone, which is great. And that, I mean, the lore of Purple Air is that you've got that back office stuff all sort of done. You plug into that and you're automatically into this larger network that's already there. And you guys are sort of working to establish some of that now. And I think one of the real challenges is if we could get ourselves to a point where it's almost like going to your phone to check the weather, where you can just go to your phone and check, and it's intuitive. If it's a graph that is showing a spike, or if it's, box and whisker plots and things like that, your average resident is not going to necessarily go back to that site because they're not going to understand it very well. But if there is something that is, I just keep thinking back to Alternatives Community Environment, ACE, years ago used to have in Dudley's, well, at that time it was Dudley Square, we used to just put a flag outside the window on the second floor red, green, or yellow, depending on what the weather was like. And we were just calling up the air beat monitoring station. Wasn't even online at that point. We were just calling up DEP and EPA and asking them, you know, what is the reading today? And then we'd stick it out there on the building. So that interface is really critical. So how do you see the development of that going forward, and the sort of beta testing and getting feedback from users?
Yeah, that's a great question, and Dieter's on the call right now, who has been more involved with some of the app work. But you know, right now, that the app that you have, the beta version, has an at a glance visualization of data that needs work, and that's something that has been a project and Air Partners that we've been working on for the last year and a half. So our next step is actually to make that at a glance visualization of data more intuitive. And with our work, you know, all of this design, we're trying to strike a balance between giving an authentic view of the air pollutant concentrations, but in a way that people can actually understand. So yeah, I would say that the something like the air quality index that basically boils all pollutants down into a single number with a bunch of, you know, obscure math behind the scenes, and says that the air pollution is either green, yellow, red, or purple, is maybe a level of abstraction that's too far and not helpful. You know, if you lose the ability to look at the impact of NO versus NO2 versus ozone versus PM, then you're losing some of the nuance and understanding like your environment and what are the different sources that are contributing to it. But that's it's a tough challenge to be able to then tease out something like an air quality index into 5 different pollutants, but still make it accessible. So that's stuff that's going into the app right now. And I think this summer into next semester, we're going to do a lot more community engagement. I think starting in September, a real focus of our team is going to be the community engagement to understand what does value mean for you all at the community activist level, at the municipal level, the elected official level, to actually understand stuff from data. And that's in the summary form and also in the real-time form. So, you know, it's a work in progress, and I would say that's beyond HEPA purifier compliance. That's probably the hardest problem we have to solve. Yeah, Barbara.
If you're going to do a chart, is there like a safe level for some of those? Like what if you're on Patient Gateway or one of those things that shows you what the normal red blood count would be, yeah, and what yours is, you know?
Yeah, there is that. But as the team was sharing earlier, for some of the most dangerous pollutants like ultrafine particles, they're unregulated and those levels don't exist, and they're also really expensive to measure, right? So some of the challenge is to visualize, you know, what is your relative exposure to dangerous pollutants for which there has not been a defined safe level and for which they're not regulated, right? So then that kind of brings us back to the challenge of, okay, well, what do you compare it against to make some sense out of? And you can compare it against average for that site, which is where some of those diurnal normalized figures can be helpful. And you can also compare it to other things that people intuitively understand. Like if we have a sensor right next to I-93, how does your exposure compare to that at a given time? So that's some of the stuff that we're exploring. And again, with some more user interviews, we'll get to a better understanding of how to do that in an intuitive way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there examples of sort of this local scale, long-term monitoring efforts that you're aware of? Just thinking about it, it sounds like it would be a pretty unique initiative, and wondering if there's any other, thinking about like, it's great to collect data, but the translation of that data, and I hear this in all of you talking of translating that data into a form that's digestible, but then also thinking about how is that data then informing policy changes on the local and statewide level. And it would be interesting to see what case studies there are of other places doing this.
This doesn't really exist in a community level implementation like what we've done. You know, we've been talking about Purple Air. Purple Air is kind of a nationwide, worldwide network, but has its own limitations that we could spend a lot of time talking about. You know, this combination of gas phase and particle phase measurements with the community engaged, community driven, where do we put these things, and what is the value we're after, is a new thing. And so some of what we're doing, we are working on some scientific publications to talk about the science of air quality impacts of the airport, but also working on sort of publicizing this approach, which is really, it's a demonstration and kind of collaborative governance between elected officials and community organizing groups and folks in academia like us. So we're figuring it out as we go, and that's why we need your feedback as we're putting together this strategic plan. We need your input on what's going to make it useful, because it's not worth us putting a whole bunch of effort into something that can't be actually implemented.
I think really this is the first step. I mean, we've been craving this sort of data for quite some time, and this is really just a step in that direction. And now, you know, the possibilities are endless, and you know what it can change and what it can impact going forward. And I think, you know, as we all work together, I mean, this working group has been amazing, and hopefully we can, you know, continue to work together to forward the next steps, to formulate that for all of our communities. So, you know, we now have 6. Winthrop, you probably need more. Chelsea, you probably need more. You know, starting with those, you know, those opportunities, and then really being able to really collect the data and measure it over time. It really gives us more ammunition for policy change, which we didn't have before, because we're constantly being told by the polluters that it's not them. And now we know it is, and we haven't been able to do that. So it's pretty powerful information.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, the Madeline's not here, so she can't, she dropped off, I guess, got attacked in the car by the 17-year-olds or whatever. But there's been, I mean, in the greater Boston area, obviously, there's a wealth of academia, and any given day you walk out in the street and you trip over some academic measuring something somewhere. And the SAPHE study with Tufts and other folks that were doing stuff in Somerville, there's been a number of projects in Chelsea, and there's been some great work done. And at an epidemiological level, it's pretty high level stuff, and it means it's a big pain in the ass because you got to go through IRBs and all this sort of stuff with human subjects. The one challenge that it's had, and it's the bugaboo for community-based groups, is that it's lacking what we have here right now, where the researchers are talking to the community groups and saying, all right, we want your feedback and how we get this network established. We're going to work with the city, the municipal governments to get this established, and the community groups. And it's not just necessarily academia parachuting in, extracting the data and disappearing. There's some incredible data sets that are out there. They're just not readily accessible. So that's one of the things, I think, one of the sexy things of this project, and one of the reasons why I asked about the access to the data, is that it's being able to access this stuff in real time online, which is where it's going to, because having the data and being able to say, look at this, you know, this is showing this problem. And it's exactly the same. They look at you and they just say, well, no, sorry. Of all the stuff we've been doing with the airport, I mean, it's decades of banging your head against a wall because they just overwhelm you with you know, if you can collect some data, they can collect better data, or they have models or whatever. So the thing is, you don't necessarily have to collect the best data. You just have to have the data that people understand and can see it. And as soon as you get a bunch of angry people in the neighborhood pissed off about something, then you've got politicians paying attention to it, and then you've got policy getting changed. That's how the Logan Health study was pushed originally. It didn't go as far as we wanted, but it really came down to just stirring the pot. And I think having accessible data is the best way to stir that pot. But it also means you find out some things. I think one of the indoor air quality study that was done in Chelsea, one of the things that we walked away from that study with is that we could get rid of the airport tomorrow. The thing that's really polluting the indoor air quality for people is their gas stoves. With all the fracking gas and things like that, you don't know what you're burning in your kitchen, and you're standing over it while you're cooking, breathing it all in. So you identify some things that are not necessarily what you expected when you start. And we should be ready for that. But I really think it's a great opportunity, and the fact that it will be compatible across this sightline communities of Logan Airport, I think is a huge plus.
Yeah, John, that's a great point. And I think, this group, when like over the next, for this life of this grant and then going forward too, I think making those connections and those relationships in order to start, making recommendations, having the data but back them up, and then finding the actors that can actually implement a lot of the things that we're talking about here and making some real progress.
Yeah.
And then it's something we'll work towards the next phase and continue from there. Scott, anything that you want to help? Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say we're still here. I mean, we are. I think again, our next phase is to take sort of the core that we just presented in this presentation and turn it into a written thing that you all can hold and look through and reference. It's going to have some specific recommendations for what to do and by different phases, and we're here to support that work of implementation as you move forward. And I think that John hit on something really important is I think the magic of this work that we've done in East Boston and now that we're doing with you all is the degree to which the right people are in the room. And it's across different domains. It's at the elected official level, appointed officials, municipal folks, academics, and advocacy groups. And so like the more we can do that, the more we can create the right thing that actually provides the value that the communities need. So hearing loud and clear that the data accessibility, not just how do I get it, but how do I understand it is a huge theme of what we're going to move forward with. And I'm watching Dieter's body language, writing notes down there in real time. So thanks for having us. Please fill out that feedback form. Anything that you can offer, even if there's stuff like, hey, you missed this important source that we know about, put it on your map. We want to make that a useful tool to you all as well.